Thanks very much for that introduction. So as you've heard already, I'm not the Minister. However, I did meet the Minister on Tuesday evening and the Taoiseach, in fact, in advance of their attending the United Nations General Assembly Secretary-General Summit on Climate Action in less than 10 days' time now, or 10 days' time, in New York on the September 23rd. So what I thought I might do is not just tell you what I think the Minister should say today, but what the Taoiseach should say in New York, because actually that was his last question to us at the end, so my speech isn't written. What should I say? Didn't give him a full enough answer on Tuesday evening, so I'm going to give you the answer now, and I hope it would address some of the things I would say to you anyway, and the things we would all like to hear the government saying. And you should know that a lot of ministers are going to New York as well as this think-in today, because underlying our interest in climate action, which is maybe newfound, is an ongoing campaign to be elected to the Security Council of the United Nations next summer. So Ireland is out there looking for votes from the countries of the world, and climate is forming part of its pitch, which you may find hard to believe. I certainly have until now, but maybe that's why they're trying to change. Anyway, what I would be wanting the Taoiseach to say in New York is this. Ireland has a proud tradition in international affairs. We have a long record of solidarity and aid with less developed countries, informed by our own experience of colonisation, of political independence and economic interdependence over the last century. We have a strong record of support for human rights, a history of overcoming conflict in our own country and sharing that learning with others around the world moving into post-conflict situations. And we have shown really strong support for multilateral institutions, all the more important in the uncertain and more chaotic world, both politically and indeed environmentally, that we have entered. And we see those institutions as protecting the rights of small nations. It's why we have such strong relationships with the small island developing states in the United Nations and other developing groups. And they are the right forums for progressing our action on the global challenges we face, whether that be climate change or other environmental or indeed political issues. But it's no secret that Ireland has not had a perfect track record on climate change. When I started working on climate first in 2005, I came from the overseas aid sector, as you heard, and we were the sixth most generous country in the world per person for overseas aid among the rich countries of the OECD who give aid. When I first did the figures, and I think I was the first one to do the figures, I discovered we were also the sixth most polluting country in the world per head of population in climate pollution. And those two things have stood in contradiction then, and they still stand in contradiction now, 14 years later, as we present ourselves to the world looking for votes based on climate change. So that's no secret. Not only have I made no secret of that as Friends of the Earth, but the government has more recently made no secret of that. We've come bottom of the class in various rankings brought out by European think tanks, and of course we are going to miss our EU 2020 targets. And as Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar told the European Parliament last year, admitted that we were laggards and that he was not proud of our record. But I actually think that puts us in a stronger position, funnily enough, to engage with the world on climate change, because we're not the class SWAT here to lecture you. We're here to share our story of struggle with how to come to grips with this most wicked problem, this most challenging of issues that involves the whole economy, the vested interests, population behaviour change, to which there is no silver bullet and no single solution. So our story of how we've begun to turn around that is one I think it's worth sharing with the world. And it's a story that started to come about when we started to listen to and trust the citizens and the communities and the businesses who want to see action, who've been driving action and who felt held back or ignored or abandoned by the state for too long. And that's begun to change in the last number of years. And it changed with something you may have heard about first, which is our Citizens' Assembly, which we used to combat or to deal with and grapple with a number of knotty problems that the state had failed to act on over the years. And we asked it to look at climate change. We asked 100 citizens to give up their time for 6 weeks, 3 months, come together, hear from experts and make recommendations. And as with other issues, they came back not with timidity and conservatism and caution, but with a bold programme of action for government saying, we want you to lead, this is a serious crisis, get on with it. And that came as a surprise to us as politicians, and it gave us the shot in the arm we needed to start grappling with it. And in turn, our Parliament took that report, and over the course of 3 or 6 months, an all-party committee stress-tested those ideas, developed those ideas, and brought forward a really solid programme for action for government to consider, with almost all party backing. And then, just a few months ago, the Irish government itself, we came out with our action plan. We realise it's only a down payment on the Paris Accord, and it's not fully yet in line with the science, but it puts us, we hope, from the bottom of the European class towards the average. And it's also true that the Parliament has not been active only in its committees. As you may know, we're a minority government and we don't control Parliament. Mostly that induces fear in civil servants and uncertainty in politicians. But for climate, what it's meant is good ideas that can command the majority of our Parliament have become law. So, for example, we became one of the first countries in the world to ban fracking. The first country in the world by law to say our sovereign wealth fund will entirely divest from fossil fuels. Now, these things are as much symbolic as they are substantive. We have very little money invested in fossil fuels and there is no fracking currently in Ireland. But they sent a strong message to the world about the direction of our travel. Now, not all of those issues that have come before Parliament have been so easily resolved, and I will come to that. And I would be remiss of me to say that this was just a perfectly designed system that myself and my advisors came up with. To be frank, of course, we were driven into this by citizen concern and increasing campaigning on the streets, particularly by the young people who have looked to their future and said, we are fearful and you are not grappling with our problems and our future's on the line, please act. That too came as a surprise. We didn't think the citizenship were more concerned by climate change than they were by everyday immediate concerns. Most recently, our Parliament then declared a climate and biodiversity emergency, only the second country in the world to do so. But now, what's really clear is that we have to act like it, and that we're only still beginning to do that. We now realise that the government has to lead system change, not rely on nudging individuals to behaviour change, which I myself, as Taoiseach, said not long ago. We realise we need to lead the transformation of our energy system, our transport system, our food system, our building system, to enable the population at large, beyond those pioneers and campaigners, to move to a situation of reducing their carbon footprint fast enough and far enough. We have to get off fossil fuels as soon as possible. We know that 80% of the proven reserves of the fossil fuels on the books of state companies and private companies across the world have to stay in the ground to give ourselves a decent chance, a two-thirds chance of staying under 2 degrees of global warming, never mind the 1.5 degrees that the IPCC and the UN says we should strive for. We have to move, therefore, to 100% renewable energy as fast as possible, not just the 70% that we have in our current plan. And our mantra has to be to decarbonise as fast as possible and to electrify as fast as possible, to decarbonise electricity as fast as possible. So today I want to make the following announcements, if only. We will bring forward as soon as possible the new climate law recommended by the Joint Directors Committee and promised in our action plan, to have it enacted before the general election. That climate law will put into law a net zero target for 2050 for Ireland as a whole. It will put into law 5-year carbon budgets that will drive action across government and across departments and across time. And we will have that in Parliament, in committee for pre-legislative scrutiny well before Christmas to enable us to have it through second stage in the Dáil in the first quarter of next year, as suggested in the action plan. But that's the timeline to get there. We will take a new position in the European Union, where in recent years it's no secret that we have been a drag on ambition. We will support the new Commission's proposals for a new target for 2030 of minus 55% compared to 1990, not minus 40%. And we recognise that that still is not in line with Europe's fair share under a scientific equity basis of what we need to do to meet the Paris goals. But for now, we will support that target while we debate what our fair share should be. And indeed, we will ask the Climate Change Advisory Council in Ireland to look at what our fair share of a 2050 target should be. Perhaps we need to get to net zero before 2050, but that is our promise for now. In the context of moving off fossil fuels, there's 2 sides to that, getting off dirty energy and getting onto clean energy. I announced today that despite our reticence around putting it into law, we will no longer issue new licences for prospecting and speculating on finding fossil fuels in our offshore waters. If that came to fruition, we would only be taking it out of the ground in the 2030s, when there would be no room on our grid or on our planet for new fossil fuels. So we recognise that now. We're not putting it into law yet. The next Parliament can decide that. I'm announcing today a moratorium on any new licences for exploration. Equally, we will not import fracked gas from the US. As I said, our Parliament made a decision not to frack in Ireland because of the impacts on communities and on the local environment and on the climate. It would be hypocritical and absurd in the extreme to build new infrastructure to import fracked gas from under the feet of communities in the US who showed such solidarity with our communities as they campaigned to ban fracking. So we will not be building terminals to import LNG into Ireland in Cork or Limerick or elsewhere. And that means it's all the more important that we move to clean energy and in a just transition way, starting, of course, with peat and coal. And here I must apologise to the workers in the Midlands and in Clare. It's 20 years since we were first advised by our own experts to get off coal in Moneypoint and peat in the Midlands. And we failed to plan for it and we failed to do it. So now we're seeing, to coin a phrase, a disorderly exit from peat and coal in Clare in the Midlands. And I want to announce today the immediate, not the prolonged future, the immediate establishment of a task force led by someone like Kieran Mulvey to go down to the Midlands and Clare now and negotiate with the trade unions, with the companies, with community representatives about a deal that involves resourcing and support for those workers to find new jobs and new careers and new opportunities for their communities. And we will be off coal and peat in our grid by 2021. 18 months is long enough for us to do a just transition. We had 18 years, we will now have to do it in 18 months. It is, after all, an emergency. In line with that desire to engage and empower communities more, I'm announcing too the establishment of a national stakeholder forum on climate change, modelled partly on the national stakeholder forum on Brexit and the national economic dialogue, where we've had really substantive discussions on the choices we face. There's a lot of initiatives on climate dialogue right now. There's no coherent strategy. This forum will sit at the apex of that new strategy, where decision makers and stakeholders can actually thrash out how best to do a carbon tax or a transition or 100% renewables. And that will be up and running before the end of this year. And finally, on renewables, as you know, we have a plan to be at 70% by 2030. I'm saying we're going to stop looking for oil and gas in our offshore waters. Our offshore waters are home to one of the best wind energy reserves in the world, and we intend to harness that instead of looking for fossil fuels. And we intend to support that industry to grow as fast as practical in order to start meeting our needs, because we need to get, as I said, not just to 70%, but to 100% as fast as possible. And I'm asking the Climate Change Advisory Council to advise on how soon it's practical for us to aim for 100% renewable electricity on our grid. But it's not just about business and big investment, although that is essential. We've seen in Ireland a growing desire of communities themselves to be involved in the energy transition, and not just in retrofitting their homes, but actually in generating, owning, and indeed selling electricity. And we know that Ireland is at its best at community level. We know from the GAA, from tidy towns, it's the scale at which we know each other and work best together. So I'm announcing today that by 2025, every school in Ireland will be a solar school. Every school will have solar panels generating electricity on its roof, not just for its contribution to renewables in the grid, but as a way to engage the hearts and minds and the heads of our citizenry in this project of societal transformation. We'll extend the household grant on solar to community buildings. We will have in place a price for microgeneration by the end of next year, 2020, and we will unleash the energy and the drive of our local communities to be involved in this transition. Now, I've mentioned the fact that a lot of this has been driven by our own citizens, by communities and activists, and particularly by the youth strikers. And I'm delighted I've been joined here today in the gallery in the UN by two of the leaders of the youth strikes in Ireland, who have put us on notice that they will not stand idly by while we abandon their future. And for too long, our government has been afraid to act for fear of annoying citizens or our vested interests in existing businesses. So much so that our young generation is increasingly gripped by climate anxiety and anger, both of which are justified. Al Gore said famously in his movie 10 years ago that he was worried that we would skip from denial to despair without stopping in the middle for action. So I'm thankful for our young people that they have stopped in the middle for action. As Greta Thunberg, who is in New York, has said, when we start to act, hope is everywhere. I want, therefore, to invite everyone to unite behind the science, as the slogan on Greta's yacht said as she sailed to New York, and to join young people on the streets in their strikes. They've asked adults to join them too, and to join me as Taoiseach in forging and powering our future to a world that they will be proud to inherit. Thank you very much.